The former United States President Donald Trump is known for many things, from his sense of humor to the beginning of the construction of a wall to divide the United States from Mexico. But as well as the rest of the presidents, during his time in government, Trump had plans that he didn't make public to the world. Were these plans about nefarious planning and criminal actions? Mark Esper, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense during the period from 2019 to 2020, broke the silence and revealed secret information about the decisions that the president planned to execute, including sending missiles to Mexico and denying his government's participation in it. How true are these revelations? Is this another media attempt to discredit Trump? Or maybe Esper's statements are the confirmation of the ruthless personality of the former US president. Mark Esper served as Secretary of Defense in the middle of Donald Trump's time in government. After his dismissal in November 2020, he was dedicated to write a memory book in which he decided to tell many of the secrets of the internal working in the White House, emphasizing the behavior of who was then the president of the nation, who proposed many plans which bordered on extremism, xenophobia, and even terrorism. However, Esper's dismissal had a lot to do with the big differences in thinking that both had on national security issues, mechanisms to contain protests, and even more sensitive issues, such as the functioning and organization of the US military. So before starting, we invite you to subscribe to our channel to always be aware of the latest news and updates of the business and entrepreneurship world. You just have to click on the red bell and YouTube takes care of the rest. That said, let's move on. Mark Esper and his problems as Secretary of Defense. It's not a secret to anyone that Donald Trump is a person of great character who focuses mainly on results, but this doesn't mean that during his time in government, the professionals around him agreed with all his decisions and no one dared to question them. This was Mark Esper's case, who started having problems in his position when his values and ideals came into conflict with those of the former president of the nation. The relationship between them was so critical that the former Secretary of Defense had prepared his resignation letter weeks before the president removed him from office, an event that took place mainly because of their differences on how to control the army and military forces during a series of events between 2019 and 2020. These confrontations of ideas were public, and the former president declared in a statement to CBS News that by then he thought that Esper was incapable of leading the army. But Trump wasn't the only one who had problems with Esper's leadership and behavior. Robert O'Brien, Trump's national security advisor since 2019, considered that Esper didn't understand or wasn't committed to the plans that the tycoon had to lead the army. Esper's layoff in 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement. But what were these irredeemable differences that they had with each other? The main one was that Mark Esper didn't agree with supporting the use of active soldiers to dispel the demonstrations that occurred over the death of George Floyd. As we can remember, these demonstrations arose because of the murder committed by a police officer during the arrest of a citizen in the state of Minnesota. The news caused thousands of people to join the Black Lives Matter movement, which President Trump wanted to quell by using military forces to enforce the law. In such a situation, Esper claimed that this path was the last to consider because the protests were not a serious or urgent alert, and he declared in a Pentagon briefing that he didn't support the invocation of the insurrection law that Trump envisioned taking. Esper confirms that the then president made a ravenous comment by saying that there's no way that only protesters would be shot to end the protests. But Mark Esper's statements went against Trump's, which led him to be fired at the end of 2020 through a tweet from the president where he communicated his new Secretary of Defense, a sacred oath, and the missiles to Mexico. These disagreements were public knowledge, but many other things were cooked up inside the White House, and after his layoff, Esper decided not to remain silent. During the month of May in 2022, extracts and some topics that would be treated in his memoir, A Sacred Oath, Memories of a Secretary of Defense During Extraordinary Times, came to light. In this book, he deals with sensitive topics regarding the Trump administration, catastrophes that took place, and a much darker and more inhuman side of the American tycoon. The work was published on May 10th and immediately became a New York Times bestseller, impressing many readers who found in the book a crude and critical portrait of the government in which Esper fulfilled his functions. One of the main topics discussed was when the then President Trump raised the possibility of sending missiles to drug laboratories in Mexico to exterminate cartels and drug trafficking across the southern border. The most impressive thing about the statement, and that made Esper's jaw drop, is that the billionaire businessman told him that such attacks could be made anonymously and silently. Are these the things that Trump and O'Brien are referring to when they say that Esper wasn't committed to the way the former president wanted to do things? Was his refusal to send missiles to Mexico part of the reason for his firing? The conversation that Esper describes in his book is not far from the common way of expression used on multiple occasions by the former president, since he says that he told him that the Mexicans had no control over their country, and therefore the United States could send some Patriot missiles to destroy drug labs in Mexico without arousing any suspicion. The former Secretary of Defense explained that he couldn't believe what he was hearing, and that he would have thought it was a joke if he hadn't been hearing it from the president's own lips. Trump and the wall with Mexico. Part of what leads one to believe that Esper's memoirs are true is the record that Trump maintained regarding Mexico and immigrants. It's enough to remember that one of his most popular phrases in the campaign that led him to be president in 2017 was the famous "build the wall," which referred to his promise to build a wall that would definitively separate the United States from Mexico in order to avoid the passage of immigrants that he defined as the cause of much of the crime problems in the country. The problematic element of the equation is that the arguments in which Trump supported the need for the wall were largely xenophobic speech with overtones of hatred towards immigrants. This meant that, once in power, restrictions on immigration procedures were increased, and raids for the Department of Undocumented Immigrants were initiated with greater emphasis, all with explicit emphasis on Mexican citizens, whom he defines as responsible for irregular immigration, which made him execute the beginning of the construction of the wall on the southern border. However, the Trump government only managed to build approximately 76 kilometers of the wall, which, according to him, would prevent the passage of criminals and drug trafficking into the North American country. The new Biden administration scrapped the idea immediately after he rose to the presidency, noticing that this generated unnecessary expenses for the government. But Trump's actions during his 4-year term and his incisive way of seeing and treating immigrants make us think that Esper's statement might not be so wrong at all. Trump, a person without principles. Despite the firmness and extremism with which Trump made decisions during his time in government, no one could ever imagine the seriousness of the situations that Esper experienced in the White House, especially every time the head of government made an extremely dangerous comment. Esper comments in his book that such was the case when in 2019, after the death of the leader of the Islamic State, Abu Bakr, Trump seemed to support the proposal of the political advisor Stephen Miller, who intended to use Bakr's head in a grotesque act as a warning for other terrorists. The then Secretary of Defense recounts in his memoirs that he was able to refuse such an action, indicating that doing so would be a war crime. This, like other experiences that the politician comments on in his book, led him to create a rather Machiavellian image of Donald Trump, even describing him as a person without principles, who supersedes his personal interests and who should not exercise public functions. The author also recounts that he considered resigning countless times, but that somehow he felt that staying there was his way of doing an act of service, putting a stop to the most dangerous proposals, since the rest of the people close to Trump never seemed to contradict him. What's difficult to understand is that during this arduous examination process, he found no obstacles that prevented him from expressing those experiences and his opinions about what happened with the former president during his time in government. Is this an indication of the veracity of the information? Was Trump really planning to launch anonymous missiles into Mexico and shoot protesters? If there is something that cannot be denied, is that none of Esper's statements move away from the public figure that Donald Trump has proven to be. Although many of his comments are full of dark humor, there are issues that can not only be dealt with humor and sarcasm, especially if it involves the lives of thousands of people and law enforcement. If true, what would have happened to Trump's orders if Esper had not refused? Would they all have been fulfilled? With these unknowns, we close today's video. We hope you enjoyed it. Write in the comments if you would like a specific topic discussed on the channel, or if you have any suggestions about the content. Thanks for watching the video. We'll see you next time.